Today we're taking notes on cattle. We've got our ID Notes cattle top left of our paper, name date session in the top right. We are going to be writing down the name of the cattle breed. And then on the right hand side, we'll be taking notes on the characteristics of the breed. If you want to draw any features that are notable or anything that's going to help you distinguish between the different breeds of cattle, go right ahead. We can find our notes in ID Quiz resources. There are some resources here for you, interesting auction website. So if you are ever looking to see how much cattle are, they'll have the different breeds there for you, and an interesting breed of cattle. There's a little National Geographic clip for you, so you can see how selective breeding has gotten a very muscular cow or a muscular breed of cattle. All right, so we're going to go into our Quizlet set. This set is right here. We're going to start with our Angus cattle. So many of you have heard of Angus, or when you go and you grab burger, you might have an Angus burger. So this cattle, it's used for meat. It's black in color. That's pretty much what Angus stands for as well. So kind of like those Russian blues where you call any gray clad a Russian blue. Some people may call any black cattle an Angus, but that's not true. Angus is an actual breed of cattle. They are black. They're pretty small at birth, but they have vigorous growth, so they grow very quickly. High yield carcass and nicely marbled meat. So this is why Angus cattle are nice for steaks and things. The marbling is going to provide more flavor in your meat. High yield means that I'm able to harvest a good amount of that meat from that carcass, from that body. So here we have that nice thickness. You can see the muscling in the legs and the hocks as well. So this is a meat cattle. It is beefy, right? Pun intended. The next type of cattle we have is the Brahman. So Brahman cattle, again, are also used for meat. The first chunk are going to be used for meat primarily. They are going to have a very large hump superior to the withers. So right on top of the withers or the shoulders, they're going to have a large hump. The color can vary anywhere from a light gray to red or a black color. Some notable things for them is that they do have an abundance of loose skin. The males also have notably dark patches on the hump and on the face, so you can tell the difference from their sex with that coloration as well. So again, we have a Brahman. So here we have that gray coloring, that darker color on the hump, all this loose skin on the sternum side, and then the darker face right here, and that is a male. And again, we have this very well-defined muscle all in this back area along with the legs. So definitely no mistaking that cattle is used for meat. Next we have is a Charolais or Charolais. Again, check the pronunciation with a cattle person. Again, used for meat. Appearance is going to be an off-white or cream color. Definitely heavy in the muscling, so you're going to be able to see all of those little ridges. Something that's interesting with them, though, is that they may actually become too large, causing some undesirable characteristics to the meat. So if they're too large, that changes the texture of the meat when you're eating it. Same thing with the muscling, right? So if it's overly muscled, you're going to get meat that might be a little bit more chewy because of the toughness of it. It also, because they become so large in the muscling, when they're birthing, if the calves are larger, then they're gonna have issues birthing those calves, because when they're born, they're of a higher weight, they're of a larger size. So that's something to think about with this particular breed of cattle. Again, so here's the Charolais. Charolais? It's probably Charolais, probably French. But you can really see the stockiness to it. It's very short, or appears to be short, right? Not isn't necessarily short. Cows are or cattle are very large, but we can see just this well-defined muscle. There's a muscle bulging out right there, right over in here, that back end, also in the neck and the withers are very well-defined muscling right there. So definitely I can look at this and say beef cattle. Next we have a Hereford. All right, so Hereford should sound a little familiar. Appearance, the head and the ventral side are going to be white. The legs and the remaining body are going to be red. Also going to have a very short neck. Something that's notable or really interesting about this breed, it's actually used in crossbreeding programs due to the overall desirable traits. So Herefords are an overall well-desired cattle, and so we will crossbreed these with other cattle to again gain those characteristics. So here is our Hereford, that white face, white ventral side, and then it's red on the top, and the neck is almost non-apparent because we can see all that muscling in there. Next we have a Simmental. So Simmental cattle is used for both meat and milk. These are draft cattle. So draft cattle draws heavy loads. So think of those draft horses, right? Your Clydesdales are going to be used for wagons. So these Simmentals are also going to be used to carry a heavy load. We can hitch a plow onto these cattle or even wagons. In appearance, they're going to be commonly black and red in color with some possible white markings. Short welled muscle neck and a dewlap. So the dewlap is that underpiece near the sternum. Definitely interesting about them is that they do have those multiple uses. They also will mature quickly, and they are bred all over the world. So they're able to withstand multitudes of different climates, which is really interesting. So here we have the Simmental. So some differences between this and that previous cattle is you still have that look at around the eye. So I still do have a coloring patch around the eye. So that's a little bit different than the other. And then that white marking goes all the way up on this particular cattle and even into the knees where it's not just stuck to the ventral side. And then this is that dewlap right in here. So that dewlap is underneath that sternum piece. So that little hanging part is that dewlap. Again, I can see that nice muscling, but it appears to be a little taller than the other that we saw, and so that is providing that nice stable ability to be able to pull and hitch onto wagons and things. Next we have is a Shorthorn cattle. So our Shorthorn is used for our meat, dairy, and as well as being a draft cattle. It's going to be white and roan. Roan means it has blotches of colors within the white coat, or it can be red in color. Something that's notable is that they calve easily, which means that they're able to birth fairly easily, not many complications in their birthing process. And they are mild tempered, which is really nice because we don't want cattle that are too aggressive because they are so large. So these cattle are also going to be used in crossbreeding programs because of that temperament and that ability to birth fairly well without many complications. So here we have our image. So we have that roan color, right? The coloring within the white. We are starting to see a little bit more of a dip in my muscling right here, and so that hip bone is starting to stick out a little bit more, so not as well muscled. Even in here, we have more of an appearance of a neck, right? I can see that. I still have some muscling, and I still have good muscling, but now I'm starting to become a little bit more tapered off in certain areas, even up in here. So this is a female, right? So we have that evidence of dairy cattle right here with this particular individual, but we're also seeing this tautness in the skin in that back area, which will become more apparent when we see other dairy cows that are strictly dairy. Next, we have an Ayrshire. So an Ayrshire is for dairy. So this cattle we are going to be using for milk production. They're going to be red and white in color. Their milk is an ideal drinking milk, so it's going to taste fairly well. Noted for very strong udder, reducing injuries when you're milking. So that udder is really nice and strong, so when we hook up the milking machines, we are not going to be damaging that flesh. So that's really nice. So we don't need to worry about damaging that cattle when we are getting high yields of milk. So again, here's our Ayrshire, and here's that speckling. This is more of what we think of as typical dairy cattle when we think of our Holsteins, but this is a red. So this is an Ayrshire. We have, again, this female is a huge udder in that back end. This is that hip bone sticking out right here. And now I'm losing that roundness in my hip area because I don't have that muscling anymore. I'm not as well defined because I don't need it. Our main breeding criteria, right, our main characteristics has gone into the producing of milk, so we're not as worried about this muscling because that's not what we're going to be utilizing this cattle for. Even the neck, I have a nice long appearance in the neck, and I have some muscling, of course, but it's starting to taper off a little bit. Next, we have a brown Swiss. So brown Swiss is used for dairy, and you guessed it, some Swiss cheese. So appearance, they're going to be light gray to a brown in color. They are the oldest dairy breed, so that's kind of interesting. So our brown Swiss is the oldest dairy breed, and here we have it. So this has like the little white tip ears, white around that rostrum area or the nose. Here's that dewlap. And again, I can see the ribs right here and some muscling, but this concaves in. Here's my udder. So, and even the legs are thinner because I'm not needing to harvest for that meat. Next we have is a Guernsey. Guernsey are dairy cattle. They're going to be fawn to reddish, brown with white patches. Something notable is going to be that milk has a yellow or gold tint. They are high nutrient content in the milk, so definitely a fatty good, high nutrient content for their milk. So this is a Guernsey. So again, I have that red color, white dewlap, fairly large cattle. Yeah, so you can see that man's hand or person's hands right there on the nose, that white speckling, and again, very linear back. Next, I have a Holstein, which is going to be familiar for most of us. These are the dairy cattle. Appearance are black with white, or you can have a red Holstein as well, so red with white. Very large, very large cattle. And the cool thing with your Holstein is that they do have the highest milk production yield. So one the reasons why you're going to see them as notable dairy cattle is because we have bred them to be the highest producers of milk. So here is our Holstein. Now, again, we have very prominent hip bone back there and our thin legs. So we are not primary for beef. We are primary for that dairy, and that hip bone area and even up in the shoulders, you can tell are where we're seeing a lack of musculature. And that was the Holstein. The last cattle we have is our Jersey. So Jersey are used for dairy. They are light fawn color. They've got black hooves and a black nose bordered with a white muzzle. They are the smallest dairy breed. So here's our Jersey. So again, we have that white tip around that rostrum area. There's their little dewlap right there. They're a little shorter in stature. Again, we have those hip bones. The pelvis is jutting out right there. We even have an inlay up in the wither. So not too highly muscularized because again, we're going to be using the Jersey cattle for dairy.